Hey, it's JP here today. I've got Jackie with me. We're going to look at the best APS-C sensor cameras on the market today. I think these three represent the best that are out there. You've got the Canon R7, you've got the Fujifilm X-T5, and then of course you've got the a6700 from Sony. People choose an APS-C sensor because one, they want a smaller camera, two, cost. Prices are a little lower, gives you a better entry point into the market, and just the ease of use. First camera, it's a great place to start. So let's take a look at these three cameras and just see which one of these is best for you. So we've got great 50mm lenses on each one of these cameras. They're native to the camera ecosystem, but they're 50mm, 1.2, 1.0, 1.2. Great lenses to just look at picture quality, look at great video. They are very large. If you're going to choose a camera like this, you're probably going to choose a smaller, more compact lens, and that makes a lot of sense in this ecosystem. But for today, we're going to look at everything on these really high-end lenses. So let's look at the specs between these three cameras. You got the Fujifilm X-T5, you got the Sony a6700, and you got the Canon R7. They're all APS-C sensors. They have a very similar crop factor. The Canon does have a 1.6, whereas the other two have a 1.5. So there's a slightly larger crop factor with the Canon than there is with the other two cameras, but they're very, very close. Megapixels are very different on these three cameras. The Fujifilm has a 40.2 megapixel APS-C sensor, whereas the Sony has a 26 megapixel sensor. And of course, the Canon has a 32.5. These kind of APS-C sensor cameras are slowly creeping their megapixels up to be able to give you better quality, better information, and that starts to show in the images. We're going to take a look at the images here in 1 second, and that'll give us a good idea as just exactly what does that mean between those three different sizes of megapixels. Price-wise, the Fujifilm is a little more expensive than the others. It's almost $1,700, $1,699. The Sony is $1,398, and of course the Canon is $1,399. So they're very similar, the Sony and Canon, but the Fujifilm was a little more expensive by about $300. So let's talk about the bit depth between these three cameras. So the Fuji and the Sony are 14-bit cameras, whereas the Canon is a 10-bit camera. So why does that matter? Well, with a 10-bit, you get about 1,000 levels of color per channel, whereas with a 14-bit camera, you get about 16,000 levels of color per channel. That's an incredible difference. So we should see that when we look at the image quality comparison. We should see color rendition. We should see that when we do our comparison with regards to dynamic range, when we look at our ISO. That bit depth should start to come into play, and we should see that in those tests. So we'll be looking for that as we move ahead. So there's a lot of the specs for the picture quality. Let's take a look at some images. Okay, so let's look at the picture quality test with these three cameras. First off, on the left, we have the Fujifilm. The X-T5 is, as all Fuji cameras have, has beautiful color. There's no doubt about it. As you punch in on the eye, it's very sharp, but it's a 40.2 megapixel sensor for an APS-C sensor. I wish it was a little bit sharper than what I see there. I don't see just something that really blows everything else out of the water. The Sony, which is a 26 megapixel sensor, it is sharp, it gives us great detail. The color's not beautiful. I mean, you could correct this color back to the Fuji without any problem, but straight out of the camera, the color's a little bit greenish, as it always has been in the background. The Canon is sharper than the other two, there's no doubt about it. Now, it's a 32 megapixel sensor, so we've got more detail there in that APS-C sensor, and I think it's the sharpest of the three of them. The color straight out of the camera is not as warm and beautiful as the Fujifilm color, but it's pretty nice. You certainly could correct any one of these and give you a beautiful image. I think the Canon at 32 megapixels is really the sharpest image here, and gives us beautiful color. So there's a look at the picture quality test. So when you look at the weight of these three cameras, with the battery and the recording media in them, the Fujifilm has 1.2 pounds, the Sony's 1.1 pounds, whereas the Canon's 1.3. They are very, very similar. That Sony is the smallest, and that is part of that form factor. It's very small, very tiny, easy to carry with you, and that's part of the attraction for that camera and the way that camera is built. Now let's look at the ergonomics of these three cameras. Let's take a look at those. So let's talk about the ergonomics of these three cameras. They are very different, and so it really is going to depend on what you like and what really appeals to you, or the type of photography you're going to do as to which one of these cameras works best for you. So let's start with the Canon. The Canon is really the one that has the best grip for me. It's got a deep grip. I can get my fingers around it. It gives me a place for 3 of my fingers. And then of course I have a finger to run my front wheel and to be able to take pictures and to hit my buttons up here. So I think as far as holding the camera, this is the one that is the easiest to use for me. It's got a pop-out screen, so you pop that screen out. It allows you to turn it, so you can vlog with it if you want to. You can turn it back to be able to set it onto the back of the camera. I think it's a great pop-out screen that works really well. I think that with that, we have also these strap holders. I really love this kind of a strap holder. I do, because this type of a strap holder doesn't get in the way if you're going to put it into a cage. They don't have the little rings that are kind of flopping around. I just think it's a much better design, just having these integrated kind of rectangular holes to be able to put your strap in. So I love that about it. Dials on this camera is you do have a back dial. It's made so that my thumb can hit that and roll it. I'd have to get used to that, because you do have a wheel and you have a joystick inside the wheel. You still have a D-pad on the bottom as well, and the set button or the Q button in the middle of it. So you have both those wheels on the back of the camera, which gives you a lot of control. It's in a little bit of an odd place to be able to put my thumb up on that second wheel, but I think it's something I could get used to. Not a lot of other buttons on this camera. I mean, they have buttons that are dedicated, like to ISO. You have your M-FN button, which is really nice because you can put certain things in that menu that allow you to access it very quickly. It comes up on the back and gives you quick access. So it's kind of a quick Q button. I like that setup on this camera a lot. But other than that, there really aren't any other buttons that you can program to do other things. So it doesn't give you that kind of an option. It does have the small HDMI, the mini HDMI, which is just what it is. It does have 2 card slots, so you have card slot 1 and 2 if you want to do 2 SD cards, and that's really nice in a camera this size to have 2 slots. The Canon runs off just that regular Canon battery, which is so wonderful. I mean, I have all kinds of these, and so it's just nice that they've kept that battery. It really is excellent and gives you incredible battery life. This is the heaviest of these 3 cameras at 20.8 ounces. But it's not that far off from the others, but it is definitely the heaviest, especially if you look at the Sony. It's definitely the heaviest camera by far. So there's the Canon, the ergonomics of the camera. Now let's look at the X-T5 from Fujifilm. Much different point of view. This is old school camera. You've got a dedicated ISO wheel, you've got a dedicated shutter wheel. It really gives you old style controls. A lot of people love it because of that. It's just easy. It's there. It's tactile. It's fast to use. You see exactly what you're doing. It just really works in a way that is so old school, and I love that about it. So I think the dials and things on this are really useful. The grip on this is a little thin for me. I find it a little hard to hold. It's very thin. I can certainly keep 3 fingers in there, but I don't feel as confident holding it as I do with the R7 by any means. It does have the rings for the strap, which is not my favorite. I like this style better, but it's certainly you can certainly use it and it works just fine. Looking at the dials, we know we've got our ISO and we've got our shutter speed. We do have the dial on the back. We've got a back wheel, so it allows us to adjust on the back. We don't have a circular wheel on the back. It's just the back wheel. We do have the D-pad with the OK menu in the back. This is part of the thing that I don't love about this camera. It's got this pop-out screen. It's that old style pop-out screen that just pops up so you can look down, which is beautiful if you're looking down to take an image. But if you want to vlog with this or get it into a really tight space, that screen really doesn't work that great. It does have the HDMI mini cable, which is what most of these cameras have. And it has 2 card slots, so you have 2 SD card slots and a great battery. This is the Fujifilm battery. This is a great battery. It gives you great battery life and is robust. I think it certainly competes with that of the Canon, which makes this really, for professional use, a very doable camera. So there's kind of the ergonomics of that camera. There is a couple of buttons here. We have 2 buttons that we can program to do different things if we want to. One on the top, one on the front, and that gives us the ability to program those, to set those to exactly what we want to control, and I like that. I mean, when you think about it, once you have your aperture and your shutter and your ISO on top, when you put one of these to white balance or something, you now have control of your camera just from a few buttons on top, and that's really nice. So there's a look at that Fujifilm. Very different, very old school, a lot of fun. It's part of the reason people love them. So now let's look at the A6700. This is the lightest camera of this whole, these three. And it's obvious when you look at it. It's a very small form factor. It's just a very interesting kind of setup. As these have EVFs right in the middle, traditional kinds of kind of DSLR or mirrorless place to put the EVF. This one has it on the side. It's got that small EVF off to the side. And so it's a little more of a challenge to see through it. You're kind of looking off to the side. The very small form factor though makes this so it's very easy to carry with you. It's a camera that's very easy to be able to travel with as a travel camera, but still an APS-C sensor. Our screen pops out to the side again, so it has that vlogging capability, which I love. Love that screen popping out to the side and think that that's very helpful. It does have the floppy rings for the strap. That's just the way it is. Dials though, we do not have on the back a second dial. We have a wheel here and we have a wheel up front, but we don't have the dial. We got the one dial in the middle with the set button. We don't get a second dial. It's just very small. There's not a lot of real estate back there to put that in. We do have the FN button, same as the Q button. It gives us a couple of different options here with the different C3 button there. We have one up on top, C2, and we got a C1 off to the side here. So there are 3 different buttons that allow you to program certain things with this camera. That's an advantage. It allows you to create exactly what menu items you want to access, and I think that's really important. This camera is really slimmed down. It doesn't have a lot of dials, but it has a lot of buttons to be able to program things, which I like a lot. I do find this, as far as grip-wise go, a little better than the Fujifilm. It's a little deeper. It allows me to get my fingers in there, and I can't quite get my little finger on this, but I can get 2 of them, and I feel secure holding this in my hand, which is really useful. It's very helpful. It has that macro HDMI cable, which they all do. This one only has a single card slot, which means you don't have 2 cards. You have a single card slot, and I think that's definitely a disadvantage. It runs on that robust Sony battery, which again competes professional level. This is the same battery they put in a lot of the professional cameras. So I think in that way, it for this size of a camera, really gives you incredible battery life and gives you a professional application. So this is where this all ends up for me. You have the R7, which is very much set up like a mirrorless camera. You've got the Fujifilm, which is more of a nostalgia camera that has all of your different dials and things that really are a throwback to back in the film days, and that's a fun kind of application and very obvious, easy, intuitive way to work. And then the A6700 is very much a digital camera. A lot of the features are internal in the camera. It does have some good buttons though that allow you to kind of bring some of those features into just quick ease to be able to use them. So they are very different. It really depends on what it is that you like and what it is that's going to work best for you. So there's the ergonomics of these cameras. When it comes to the monitors, they all have a 3-inch monitor. The Fuji is the one that has the most quality and the best information. You can see that when you use these 3 cameras. It has a 1,840,000 dot monitor, whereas the Sony only has a 1,030,000 dot monitor, and the Canon has a 1,620,000 dot. So the Sony does suffer a little bit there, and you can see that when you put them head to head, when you're looking at the images, you can definitely see that difference. Viewfinder-wise, the Fujifilm was definitely ahead on this one. It's got a 3,690,000 dot EVF, and so compared to the Sony, which is 2,359,000 dot EVF, and the Canon, which is a 2,360,000 dot EVF, the viewfinder on that Fuji is way ahead of those other 2 cameras, which are very close to one another. So you get a better viewing experience through the EVF. So if you're working outside in any kind of a sunny situation or a bright light, you're using the EVF. Like me, I use the EVF all the time. I don't use the screen on the back very often. And so I love the more detail you get with that Fujifilm. When it comes to autofocus points between these cameras, the Fuji has 425 phase and contrast detect autofocus points, whereas the Sony has 759, which is significantly greater. It gives you better coverage, and I think it really helps that autofocus to work a little better. The Canon has 651 phase detect, so you have some difference there between these 3 cameras. Really the Fujifilm being the one with the least amount of points and the Sony being the one with the greatest. But let's just take a look at how these 3 cameras compare with each other when it comes to autofocus. I think this is probably one of the most valuable tests that we do, the autofocus test, because it allows you to just see how the autofocus on these cameras are going to respond and work for you. This is in the rain, she's outside, she's walking towards us, and at a slower pace, and we're not shooting at a fast burst, but we are shooting at like 1,000th of a second at 2.8, so the autofocus has to be on at 2.8, but we're shooting it fast enough so that the images aren't going to blur. It is fascinating with the Canon, the R7. I shot 43 images, and as you watch her go forward, every single one of them is sharp, except for one that was a little tiny off, but more than acceptable. It's beautiful. The autofocus on that Canon was absolutely spectacular. Not a problem at all. So when I went to the Fujifilm, I didn't shoot as many. I ended up with 25 rather than 43, which is a big difference. But in the 25, she's in focus on every one of them as well. Nothing was out of focus. There were two that were kind of marginal. So ratio-wise, I'm looking at going 2 that are marginal. Canon had only 1 that was marginal, but this is 25 versus 43. I think the Canon did much better in this test, but both of them, neither of them had anything that was out of focus. Now for the Sony. The Sony, I shot 35 images, and as I looked through them, every single one of them is pretty much right on sharp. A lot of times cameras struggle when you go from full body into this kind of waist up. None of these 3 cameras really did. That was where I saw a marginal shot for each of the other 2 cameras, but the Sony was clean, sharp all the way from back to front. It was pretty impressive. Yeah, it was very impressive. So I didn't have any that were marginal. So when I look at these, which would I say is the best autofocus? It's pretty much the Sony, but when I say that, it's such a close game now. It isn't like they're miles apart. They're very, very, very close, and the Sony just barely edges the other 2 out, but they all had incredible autofocus, and they stuck with their image. It was pretty impressive. So continuous shooting is always an important thing to consider when you're buying a camera, because depending on what kind of work you do, if you're shooting birds and wildlife and that kind of application, if you're doing sports, you're going to want a camera with faster frames per second. That's just all there is to it. So between these 3 cameras, the X-T5 has 15 frames per second, like 119 JPEGs, 19 RAW. The Sony has 11 frames per second, up to 1,000 JPEGs, 59 RAW. The Canon has 30 frames per second, up to 126 JPEG and 42 RAW. So there's a lot of difference between these 3 cameras when it comes to frames per second, because it isn't just the frames per second, but it's the number of images that you can continue to shoot that allows you to continue to shoot when you're following a subject matter. So you take a look at those 3 and you'll see a little bit of a difference in which one is going to work best for you. So now let's take a look at the autofocus video test, and let's get into some video specs. So when you look at autofocus in video mode on these 3 cameras, she's just walking towards us. She's turning around, so the camera has to find her face again. She walks to us, she leaves us, she turns around, comes back to us, and it's really fascinating to watch. Each one of these cameras did a great job. I think the Canon was spot on with her. I think the sensitivity, I would bring the sensitivity down on the Canon, because you notice when she walks away from you, the camera makes a big jump to the background, then back to her, and I would slow that down so it's a little more organic, a little slow to make that big move, and that would make this look a little nicer. Both the Fujifilm and the Sony were a little slower to respond, and that made that feel a little more organic. They did start to move to the background, but came right back to her, and it didn't feel quite as abrupt. So you'd have to play with the response time on these, but boy, each one of them looked excellent. In this test, the Fujifilm, the Sony, and the Canon all responded really well. It stayed with her, it moved around. I mean, it's a little more of a dynamic move when you're moving past her, and it's getting in tighter and getting further away. But as far as autofocus goes, in this test, they all 3 looked excellent. I think they all 3 really passed the flying colors. So I'm going to say it's pretty much a tie. Here's the internal recording modes for these 3 cameras. The Fujifilm has an H.264, an H.265, an MP4, and an MPEG-4. You got 422 10-bit and 4K, which is a great codec, gives you beautiful video. So the Sony has an XAVC HS 422 10-bit and 4K. It also has an HS in 420 10-bit 4K, and it's got an S in 420 8-bit 4K. It really steps down from there for some other lower Kodaks, but those higher end Kodaks in the 4K are really in very much the same category as what we get with the Fujifilm. So we're going to want to compare those and see what they look like. So the Canon has an H.265 MP4 422 10-bit 4K, which is going to really compare very nicely with these other two cameras. We'll take a look at that. It's got an H.264 MP4 420 8-bit 4K. And those are the two kind of main Kodaks for the Canon. So let's now take a look at these three different cameras and look at the video in all these different high-end 4K Kodaks. So there are the specs. Now let's just look at a little sample of the video. The Fujifilm it's just beautiful. They all shoot 422 4K, and they're giving you a beautiful picture. I feel like these cameras have video capabilities that are exceptional. You see just how beautiful the rendition is. The color is beautiful here. That 4K 422 4K is just gorgeous on the Fujifilm. I see the same when I look at the Sony. The Sony's a little hot. It would bring our exposure down a little bit. It's going to make this feel a little nicer to me. But it's open, and it gives us great detail. There's great roll-off from the highlights to the shadows. Really like it. When I come to the Canon is a little more crunchy, and what I mean by that, the blacks are a little deeper. And so we have just a little deeper color, but it's still open and beautiful. Each one of these gives you a beautiful 422 4K. When it comes to video though, if you're already in the Canon world, I would shoot Canon because it's going to match your other cameras better. But if you're just shooting a camera to do individual stand-up video, any one of these three would work. But if you have a system already, stay in the ecosystem you're in. When it comes to recording limits between these three cameras, none of them have any kind of record limits. It's just a matter of they'll run until they get too hot to keep running. And we didn't have any problems, but we didn't do long kinds of takes to really test that. When it comes to shooting video, you've got to have log. And each one of these cameras do have log. Fuji's got F-Log and F-Log 2. Sony's got the S-Log 3. And of course, Canon's got their C-Log 3. So you've had great log options with these three cameras. So that really gives you the ability to shoot in high kind of dynamic range situations and to be able to color grade to get great looking video from these three cameras. All three of these cameras will allow you to upload Luts, which is really important. It gives them a much greater capability when it comes to shooting video. Now let's look at external recording. The Fujifilm will give you a 422 10-bit HDMI out through the HDMI at 6K, 24 and 30 frames, 4K, 24, 30, and 60 frames. Those are great specs at 6K. The Sony is going to give you a 422 10-bit through the HDMI port for 4K, 24, 30, and 60. But the Canon's only going to give you a 1920 by 1080, a 2K video out when it comes to external recording. All three of these cameras have micro HDMI output, so it's just that small camera, small connectors. That's the way that is. Each one of these cameras have 5-axis stabilization. So they each have 5-axis stabilization, but they work very differently depending on the camera, and I can see a tremendous difference between the three of them. So let's take a look at that test. I've got a rig with all three cameras on it. We're going to do some movement where we see how good that 5-axis stabilization is on each one of these platforms. So here's all three of these cameras, video stabilization as I walk around just looking how stabilized they are. The Canon is beautiful. It really is smooth. You see it as you move around her face. As you get in a little tighter, it's just very pretty. The Sony and the Fujifilm, they're just kind of bouncy and not very smooth at all. The Fujifilm struggled focus-wise a little bit when we did this test. The focus was kind of missing her eyes a little bit, whereas both the Canon and the Sony stayed right with her. But as far as stabilization goes, the Canon is definitely superior. So the ISO capabilities of these three cameras are pretty lined up with each other, but the only difference really is the Fujifilm starts at 125, does not start at 100, whereas the Sony and the Canon do start at 100. And the Fujifilm ends at 12,800, whereas both the Sony and the Canon go to 32,000. So let's just take a look at this test and let's just see if we see digital noise and where it starts to change on each one of these sensors. So let's compare the ISO with these three cameras. Starting off with the Fujifilm X-T5, we look up here in the corner, you can see kind of what the grain pattern looks like when we're up in the gray areas up in that by the fireplace there. I'm just going to bring that up on this first little set here. And at 400, it is interesting to me. I would not have expected to see some kind of a difference in these cameras at 400, but I feel like I'm seeing on the Canon maybe just a little bit more digital noise than we get on the other two cameras at 400. I'm certainly starting to see it manifest itself. But let's go on up now to 800, which is going to give us a little better idea. 800 is really where we're going to start to see some difference. At 800, the Fuji is pretty good. Sony is starting to show some digital noise. At 800, the Fuji is absolutely better. My dog thinks so too. I think at 800, the Fuji is definitely the cleanest color here. Let's go up to 1600. So at 1600, we should be able, it should start to have a pretty good break. So we look at the image here up in that corner and look at the Canon. It's got a lot of digital noise. The Sony is definitely better. The Fuji's holding its own there. I mean, it really is. The Fuji is doing really well. At 1600, I think that looks really, it looks excellent. Let's take a look at 3200 and see how that plays out. So at 3200, we still have, I mean, now the Fujifilm's showing a lot of digital noise in the grays, but so is the Sony. And the Canon definitely is as well. Boy, so far, I think the Fujifilm has been probably the cleanest, and the Canon has been the one that's been probably the least clean of all of them, if that's the word, has the most digital noise. At 6400, lots of digital noise on all of them. And pretty comparative. The Fuji's slightly better, but not a ton better. So now let's take a look at 12,800. Should be seeing a ton of digital noise in here. Wow, look at that. You see it in the background. You really see it on their face, on the Canon. Look at her face. She's just really splotchy. Actually, the Canon looks a little better at this higher ISO than maybe the others do. You get that red line down the nose or that transition. Look at it on the Fujifilm. You get that really bad transition where it transitions kind of over that bridge of nose through the shadow. See that kind of red line. Lots of digital noise on all of them. I think the Fuji still is just slightly ahead. The Canon has eclipsed the Sony at this far end. So last of all, we have 25,600. Fujifilm doesn't go to 25,600, so we're taking a look at it here on the Sony and on the Canon. We just have major digital noise, major red kind of transition line on their noses. Yeah, these are, both of them are not looking great at all. Maybe the Sony looks a little bit better there. You decide. When I look at this, I feel like the Fujifilm has a nicer grain. That's that 40 megapixel sensor. Has a little nicer grain. I think the Canon was probably the one that struggled the most with Sony in the middle. So there's a look at the ISO test. Now let's take a look at the dynamic range test. This is pretty important because these sensors are going to really respond very differently. So let's just see how they handle dynamic range. So let's look at the dynamic range test. Now we did this a little different because it was raining outside. We just threw a hard light onto the white moldings in the background, so it really gives us a hard dynamic range here. It's pretty, this is really exceeds these cameras, but it is interesting to see how and when they can pull that dynamic range back together. So we look on the first one. If you look at the Fujifilm, the X-T5, we see some detail in the background. I see more with the Sony. I see more in the moldings in the background, see a little more of the moldings. I don't see as much with the Canon. I think the Sony, or the Fujifilm and the Canon are very similar when I look at these first two. If we go over now to a -1, -1 is a good place because at -1, we're starting to underexpose the highlights, and it's going to give us more detail. So look at the Fujifilm, the X-T5. We have quite a bit of detail in that back. The Sony is looking really good. Sony's brought us up almost a stop there in the back, and the Canon caught up a little better on that one. Canon is actually looking as good or better than the Sony. I've always felt like these cameras, you want to underexpose them a little bit, but the Canon looks absolutely fabulous there at -1. And if you blow this up and look at as far as grain goes on these, I mean, everyone's still looking really sharp. Grain is not a problem. So let's go to -2. So when we go to -2 here, we are getting more and more detail in the background. They're starting to level out a little bit with each other. The Fujifilm, the X-T5, the A6700, yeah, and the R7, they're all very similar. I think the Canon is definitely ahead. Canon is looking better. And again, we're not looking at bad grain on any of these. We still have beautiful, sharp image. We are not getting any kind of grain, and the color is still holding pretty good. Yeah, the color is still holding. It's not shifting too bad. It's maybe starting to shift just a little bit, kind of warmish. But let's go to -3. We should see a color shift here. We should see at -3, yeah, you start to see it. The blacks start to feel a little pasty. We certainly have great detail in the background, and it's holding the background much better. Unfortunately, that warm color on the right-hand side was an LED that was rotating, and so sometimes it showed up stronger than others, which was unfortunate. It didn't help the test at all. But I'm looking at it color-wise here, and it's still pretty good at -3. It still gives us pretty good detail. The color hasn't shifted very much. We're not seeing a lot of buildup in grain. Well, I'm starting to see it. At this point, I am starting to see it, especially in the Fujifilm. I'm starting to see just a little bit of grain buildup. I'm starting to see some kind of noise, but not a lot. All right, so let's look at the -4. Now, in the background, the color on the tile back there is a very warm LED, and it didn't register on the -4 for the Sony. And I didn't have one that it did as I was shooting it. So it gives us the impression that that one is not shifted as much. We don't have that orange to look at. If you look at the orange in the Canon, the R7, it really shifts. And you see in the X-T5, it's shifting. We're starting to see digital noise in the face. Definitely at -4, these cameras are starting to have a problem. You certainly see great detail in the background, but you're getting a trade-off of having a lot of digital noise. So, all right, so let's look at +1. This is always scary to go here because you just start to lose so much detail almost immediately. The X-T5, we see no detail in the background whatsoever. We're already starting to get a little bit of color shift on their faces, on her face. The Sony's holding up the background the best. We see a little detail in the background, but the Canon's long gone. Long gone. Canon pushes down the scale a little more, which helps it when you underexpose. Sony's up or on, probably a little more equal up and down. That gives you just a little better detail at +1. So now let's look at +2. This is really, it's pretty much gone. Our color's shifting, things are starting to posterize. The Fujifilm, you look at the background, it's just a big white blob. We hold the window with the Sony, so the Sony's still holding up when we go to +2. But the Canon, it's completely gone. Our color is shifting. The tone, the digital noise in the faces is starting to build. It's just, I mean, you can't +2 a digital camera very easily. So because you can't do +2, then let's look at +3, because why wouldn't we? Because if +2 is bad, +3's got to be awful, and it is. Face goes just a really weird greenish color. The background's blown out. And which one holds it the best? Well, you'd have to say Sony when you go up to this upper scale here, because it's holding that background the best. I'm seeing a little bit. But look at the stuff out the window. There's no color left there. It's just black and white out the window on any of these. It's just lost all color detail completely. So I think it's interesting. I think the Canon holds things best as you're down the scale. Sony holds them a little better as you're in the middle and up. So boy, it's a tough call on which one of these is best. They're very, very competitive with each other. I think the Canon perhaps has a little better dynamic range than the other cameras, but not by a lot. So let's conclude this. This decision for buying a camera in this category is very simple to me. If you already have lenses in one of these categories, then you would certainly buy the camera that's already in the ecosystem that you've invested yourself in. If you have RF lenses, then you would buy a Canon camera. But if you're trying to decide which one of these is best for you, then I think it boils down to some of the ergonomics and the picture quality and some of the different specs of these cameras that are going to fit best what you want to do. If you look at size, the Sony is very small, very easy to carry with you. That's a real advantage. If you're looking at really good autofocus, that Sony and the Canon are incredible. If you're looking for beautiful picture, it's hard to beat Fujifilm. You know, so each one of these has a different kind of place in the market. If you're looking for frames per second, that's something to consider, depending on what you're shooting, just how important frames per second are to you. So you're going to need to sit down and just make a little list. This is what I want to shoot. This is what I think is important to me. And then look at the specs between these three cameras and find out which one of them is going to best suit you and what you shoot. Overall, I don't think you can go wrong with Canon. Overall, Sony's a great camera. Overall, Fuji's pretty nice too. So there's a look at the X-T5, the A6700, and the R7. Keep those cameras rolling. Keep on clicking.